Hi, welcome to our course. Nice to meet you again. I'm Joan.
I'm James.
Water can clean our body. Therefore, the extensive meaning also comes that it can purify our soul and heart. We can find this kind of imagery in both Chinese and English classics. Chinese great poet Qu Yuan used this imagery in his great work, Fisherman, in 楚辞. 楚辞 was a new style of poetry to emerge after the Book of Songs. It originated in the state of Chu in the 4th century BC. The kingdom of Chu was a powerful state in southern China at that time. The region is fertile, and the life of the inhabitants was more highly developed than that of the northern people. The people there produced their own type of songs, a representative connection of which was compiled under the name of 楚辞, or the Songs of Chu. Qu Yuan was the outstanding representatives of 楚辞. He initiated the style of Sao, abandoning the classic 4-character verses and using verses with varying lengths to give his poem a more flowing rhythm and greater latitude of expression.
Qu Yuan was a poet from southern Chu during the Warring States period. He is considered the first prominent Chinese poet. 25 of his poems are found in an anthology of poetry, 楚辞, which is also known as Elegies of the South or Songs of Chu. Together with the Book of Songs, the 楚辞 is one of 2 great collections of ancient Chinese verse.
Qu Yuan is also regarded as one of the most prominent figures of Romanticism in Chinese literature, and his masterpieces influenced some of the greatest Romanticist poets in Tang Dynasty, such as Li Bai and Du Fu. Qu Yuan is also remembered as the origin of the Dragon Boat Festival.
It is said that when Qu Yuan was falsely slandered by his fellow officials, he decided to take a stand for the truth and committed suicide. He came to represent the laudable qualities of incorruptibility and loyalty. According to legend, when he drowned himself in the Miluo River, the local people went out in boats to look for his body. In order to keep fish and evil spirits away from his body, they beat drums and splashed the water with their paddles. They threw rice into the water as a food to distract the fish away from his body. The act of racing to search for his body in boats gradually became the cultural tradition of dragon boat races, which are held on the anniversary of his death every year. The Dragon Boat Festival falls on the 5th day of the 5th month of the Chinese lunar calendar.
Other than his literary influence, Qu Yuan is also regarded as the earliest patriotic poet in China history. The loyalty and unyielding patriotism expressed in his poems embodied Confucianism political ideas and have served as a model for Chinese intellectuals to this day. Let's study the water imagery in his poem, in Fisherman. 屈原既放，游于江潭，行营仄畔，颜色憔悴，形容枯槁。渔夫见面而问之曰：“子非三女大夫乎？何故自于斯？”屈原曰：“举世皆浊，我独清；众人皆醉，我独醒。是以见放。”
Qu Yuan, being rejected, wandered by the side of the river depths, sighing while roving along marshes, worn out in complexion and withered in looks. The fisherman saw and asked him, "Art thou not the lord of the Trilane portals? Wherefore hast thou come hither?" Qu Yuan replied, "People are all muddled, but I alone am clear. They are all drunk, while I am sober and drear. That is why I am rejected. In the next lines, the fisherman said, a sage does not stay apart and aloof, but adapts to his environment. If all the world is muddy, why not beat up the mud and stir up waves? If all men are drunk, why not lap at their lees and drink their dregs? Why get yourself exiled because of your deep thoughts and noble aspirations?
屈原曰：吾闻之，心慕者必谈冠，心欲者必正衣。安能以生之察察，受物之问问者乎？命复相留，葬于江鱼之腹中。安能以浩浩之白，而蒙世俗之尘埃乎？
Xu Yuan replied, I have heard that who has rinsed his hair, then brushes his cap, who has washed his body, then shakes his clothes. One does not sully his own cleanliness with filthiness. I would rather jump into the river, bury myself in the bellies of the fishes, than suffer my own purity to be covered by the dirt of the vulgar world.
Okay, let's see the attitude of the fisherman. 渔父莞尔而笑，鼓翼而去，来歌曰：沧浪之水清兮，可以濯吾缨；沧浪之水浊兮，可以濯吾足。遂去，不服于言。
The fisherman smiles and taps the side of the boat with his oar, and singing, If the water of Tanglang is clear, I would wash the tassel of my hat with it. If the water of Tanglang is turbid, I would wash my feet with it. Then go away. He did not talk with Xu Yuan again.
As we can see, the poem Fisherman presents a conversation between Xu Yuan and the fisherman on a marsh bank. The fisherman, curious, asks of his wandering. Xu Yuan replies, the world is foul, and I alone am clean. The world is drunk, and I alone am sober. So I was banished. The fisherman advises him to adapt to the times, but Xu Yuan insists that he would rather jump into the river than to spoil his purity with the filth of the world.
Seeing the poet unconvinced, the fisherman sings a Tanglang song while slowly paddling away. The meaning of the song is that when the present society is clean, it is fine to work with it. But when it becomes dirty, one should be happy to leave it. Xu Yuan is idealistic and firm in standing by his beliefs, come what may, and absolutely willing to die for them if he must. The latter is pragmatic, seeing the world for what it is, and willing to be flexible to achieve his goals.
For a humanist who focuses on good and true like Xu Yuan, there is always a lot to do, and if society goes wrong, he would rather sacrifice himself. As a Taoist, if you cannot change a thing because you are not in a position of power, you just stay calm and carry on and let your roots grow deeper into the soil. You need to have the wisdom when to act and also when not to act, because if it would be completely useless. So fishermen are often a symbol for Taoism because of their simple and natural life, while water is often a symbol of purity of the society and of a human soul. About 1,500 years later, American writer T.S. Eliot also wrote a poem, Westland, discussed about the theme of living and death by water. In her long poem, there is a chapter called Death by Water.
T.S. Eliot, an American poet, dramatist, and literary critic. He was educated at Harvard University, where he studied philosophy, which Eliot adopted and reflected in his poetry. He was influenced by anti-Romanticism and the Italian Renaissance, particularly in Dante's poetry. In 1914, he went to Europe and settled in England. It was in London that Eliot came under the influence of his contemporary Ezra Pound, who recognized his poetic genius and assisted in the publication of his work in a number of magazines. In 1948, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. In 1965, he died in London.
The Wasteland is his masterpiece. The Wasteland was published in 1922. It reviewed the spiritual crisis of post-war Europe. It reads like manifestos of the lost generation and established Eliot's position as the leader of not only of American poetry, but of a whole generation of writers, later to be identified as Wasteland painters like Hemingway and Faulkner. The Wasteland consists of 5 discontinuous segments, each composed fragments incorporating multiple voices and characters, literary and historical allusions, bits and pieces of contemporary lives, myths and legends. The central theme is desperation. Although it gestured toward religious belief, The Wasteland was not a religious poem. The desperate quest for regeneration in a desolate landscape remains unfulfilled.
The Wasteland is written in 434 lines total. It has been called one of the most important poems of the 20th century. Despite the poem's obscurity, its shifts between satire and prophecy, its abrupt and unannounced changes of speaker, location, and time, its sentimental but intimidating summoning up of a vast and dissonant range of cultures and literatures, the poem has become a familiar touchstone of modern literature. The poem reflects Eliot's grief over the loss of cultural legacy and the adoption of the greedy and artificial outlook towards life. The contemporary world, according to Eliot, has lost the true spirit of traditions or culture. The poem expresses solutions through following the blend of religious and spiritual values of the East and the West.
Let's talk about the structure of this poem. It covers 5 parts. First, the burial of the dead. Second, a game of chess. The third, the fire sermon. The fourth, death by water. The fifth, what the thunder said. What we learn today is part 4, death by water.
I will read the poem for you. Philebus the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of gulls, and the deep sea swell, and the profit and loss. A current undersea picked his bones in whispers. As he rose and fell, he passed the stages of his age and youth, entering the whirlpool. Gentile or Jew, O you who took the wheel, and look to windward. Consider Philebus, who was once handsome and tall as you.
The style of this poem overall is marked by hundreds of allusions and quotations from other texts, classic and obscure, that Eliot peppered throughout the poem. For example, the first sentence, Philebus the Phoenician. Actually, this comes from Shakespeare's drama, Tempest. So there are only 10 lines in total in part 4. All lines are symbols with profound meaning. Some people say that its symbolic content is equivalent to Dante's purgatory. People die in a sea of desire. After death, they forget everything before their death and let them reflect quietly in a sea of desire of death. The sea in Eliot's work is not only a symbol of lust, but also purgatory. It makes people recognize their sin. In fact, Eliot wants modern people to face up to their sins and wash their souls. The Wasteland does not contain any specific rhyme scheme. It is rather written in blank verse. Eliot has also used chunks from different songs in a different section with specific meters to make his poem melodious at some points and rugged at other points. Let's look at the theme of the poem. The poem expresses the thoughts of the poet and his resentment at the loss of morality, humanity, and spirituality in the modern world. It demonstrates that the people of the contemporary world are like a body without a soul. They are greedy to the extent that they do not have time to think about what they have lost. The poet is sad by the after effects of wars and events happening in the 20th century. Therefore, he divides his poem into sections to draw a contrast between the modern people and humanity before them. He also explains that the final salvation can be achieved by being more spiritual. Okay, that's the end of this unit. See you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.